when I bought the 108-year-old log cabin tucked deep in the woods. All I wanted was peace, history, and a little hard work. It had stood through wars, floods, and generations of weather, but apparently it couldn't survive a modern HOA. The moment I started restoring it, cleaning up the roof, reinforcing the foundation, fixing the rotted beams, I got a notice taped to the old oak tree out front. Then came the calls, the citations, and finally, the cops. Yes. The Homeowners Association actually called the police because I didn't file the proper appearance permits to patch up a structure that existed long before their neighborhood even had roads. First, I thought it was a misunderstanding. I tried reasoning. I even offered to walk the HOA rep through the cabin and explain its historical value. But that didn't matter to them. All they saw was something they couldn't control. And when the officer showed up, not even he could believe they'd wasted his time over hand-planed floorboards and period-correct shutters. That's when I realized something bigger was going on, something about power, pride, and pushing boundaries. So I started digging into laws, into records, into property taxes. What I found next didn't just change the game, it flipped the entire HOA on its head. And by the time I was done, their smug little neighborhood owed the county $87,000 more than they ever expected. But how? Well, that's the part you're going to want to stick around for. The funny thing is, this old cabin had stood on that land long before there was ever a Maple Creek subdivision or even a paved road within 5 miles. It used to belong to a Civil War blacksmith, then a forest ranger, and finally an old-timer named Gus who hadn't paid much attention to modern zoning rules. When I bought it, the property was technically just outside the edge of the HOA's official boundaries, but that didn't stop them from acting like they had full control over it. The moment they saw a few power tools and scaffolding out front, the complaints started rolling in. The HOA president, woman named Cheryl, made it her mission to preserve the community's uniform appearance. Never mind the fact that my place couldn't even be seen from the nearest sidewalk. To her, a hand-restored log cabin with character didn't fit the modern aesthetic of beige vinyl siding and perfect landscaping. Every week brought a new violation: no to soon-approved materials, excessive noise, improper signage. One time, she even flagged me for incompatible roof lines. What does that even mean? First, I thought about backing down, just keeping quiet, maybe even putting up a fence and calling it a day. But something about how smug she looked when she told me I wouldn't be allowed to devalue the neighborhood flipped a switch in me. So I went to the county clerk's office, curious if my property was even subject to their rules at all. That's when I saw something that changed everything. The documents at the county clerk's office were old but clear. My cabin sat on historical land, and according to the original plat maps from the 1800s, it had never been folded into the HOA's governing boundaries. That meant all their letters, fines, and threats were technically meaningless. But instead of giving them the satisfaction of a confrontation, I quietly kept working on my restoration, chinking the logs, replacing rotten floorboards, and rebuilding the stone chimney by hand. That's when things escalated. One afternoon, I was fitting reclaimed windows into the front frame when 2 patrol cars rolled up the dirt drive. An officer stepped out, looking confused but polite. "We got a call about unauthorized construction," he said, already glancing around. I showed him the permits I'd filed with the county, perfectly valid and up to date. He nodded, apologized, and left. But that wasn't the end of it. The next day, I got a certified letter saying I was under investigation for diminishing neighborhood property values. It wasn't from the county or city. It was a private lawsuit filed by the HOA, claiming I was disrupting the visual harmony of the area. I could feel the trap they were trying to set: drain me in court, bury me in paperwork, and force me to either sell or conform. But what Cheryl and her board didn't know was that I'd already started digging into their property records, and the numbers I found. Let's just say they were about to regret poking the bear. I spent the next few nights knee-deep in county tax maps and zoning records, with a flashlight in one hand and a notebook in the other. At first, I was just trying to find a way to push back. But then I noticed something strange. Several of the newer homes within the HOA's limits had oddly low tax assessments. It's way lower than they should have been, especially for the size of their properties. One address in particular stood out. Cheryl's, her modern lakefront home, had an appraisal number from 10 years ago. Before the renovations, she bragged about on every neighborhood flyer. Somehow, the tax office had never caught the update. I made a quiet visit to the assessor's office and asked for a public review of all HOA-listed homes. It was my right as a resident, even if I wasn't under their rule. A few raised eyebrows, but no red flags yet. Back at the cabin, I kept the restoration going, hammering and painting while keeping one eye on the mailbox. Cheryl must have sensed something shifting, because within days, new signs appeared on the HOA board. Unauthorized. Residents will be reported. My cabin was now labeled non-compliant. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from a county official. Calm voice, but direct. He said, "We received documentation from you last week. There's something serious here." My stomach tightened. It was working. But I knew once Cheryl and the others found out what I'd uncovered, things were going to explode. The next morning, I found a notice taped to my front door. Not from the HOA this time, it was from the county. A formal cease and desist order, citing unauthorized historical property modifications. My hands went cold. I hadn't filed for historical protection, so how could this even apply? Confused and angry, I called the county office, only to be told someone had anonymously submitted paperwork classifying my cabin as a protected historical site. The twist? That classification meant I couldn't even repaint the siding without state approval. It was clearly a move to freeze me out, and I had a good idea who was behind it. Cheryl had taken the fight to a new level. She was using the system to trap me, turning my own home into a legal battlefield. But as frustrating as it was, it gave me a new angle. If my cabin was truly a protected site, the HOA had zero jurisdiction over it, and if they tried, I could take them to court for harassment and overreach. The more I read into the laws, the more I realized this could actually backfire on them. But before I could act on it, I noticed something even more bizarre. A small surveyor's flag appeared on the edge of my property on my side of the line. I hadn't authorized any survey, and it definitely wasn't from the county. Someone was trying to redraw my boundary lines. Now, it wasn't just about taxes or restoration, it was about land. And I knew I had to act fast. I took everything I had, photos, video footage from my doorbell cam showing the surveyor's flag being placed, legal documents about the historical designation, and the HOA's repeated noticers, and walked it straight into a lawyer's office who specialized in property disputes. Turns out, not only was the boundary tampering illegal, but the HOA had also grossly overstepped its authority by reporting my cabin to the county without my consent. My lawyer filed a formal complaint with the State Historical Commission and submitted a countersuit accusing the HOA of harassment, misrepresentation, and abuse of power. When we walked into the courtroom weeks later, Cheryl sat there with her arms folded like none of this mattered. But her smirk faded fast when the judge laid out the facts, especially after my lawyer played footage of her sneaking the surveyor onto my land in the early morning hours. It was undeniable. The judge ruled in my favor on all counts. Not only did I retain full rights to restore my 108-year-old cabin, but the court also revoked the false historical status they tried to weaponize against me. But the real shocker? The judge also demanded a reassessment of the HOA board's properties for potential zoning violations. A few weeks later, word spread like wildfire. Several board members, including Cheryl, had their property taxes raised by over $87,000 due to unpermitted expansions. Just when I thought the dust had settled, I received a certified letter from a state agency apparently. The cabin sits atop something much older than expected. The letter came from the State Historical Preservation Office. Turns out, during their investigation into the HOA's bogus historical claim, they'd uncovered something legitimate beneath my cabin, remnants of a long-forgotten underground stagecoach rest stop from the 1800s. It had been buried under years of soil and time, completely untouched. The irony wasn't lost on me. The HOA had tried to weaponize history to stop my repairs, and in doing so, they accidentally helped preserve real history. With help from a local university, I opened the site to careful excavation. It became a small community project. Neighbors who once kept their distance now came by with old family stories and photos. Even folks who'd sided with the HOA showed up, not to argue, but to learn and support. The conflict slowly shifted from a fight to a shared appreciation for the land's history. The HOA, now under completely new leadership, issued a formal apology. Cheryl moved out quietly a month later. The neighborhood's attitude changed too. No more anonymous complaint slips in mailboxes or HOA board members on power trips.